Ron Cruse served in the Royal Canadian Air Force from 1947 to 57. He was an aero engine tech and a flight engineer, and has a very special connection to the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum's Lancaster. And he joins us this morning. So I'm going to get to the Lancaster and your connection to that in a moment. But you started out at the ripe old age of 17.
17, correct. And I went to Camp Borden, which learned the basic training, mechanical training, and then was transferred to Trenton, Ontario, to number 6 Repair Depot. And I worked at acceptance and ferry flight in Trenton, where we accepted planes into the RCAF, tested them, and sent them back to different units. So we'd bring new planes into the Air Force, pick them up at the contractor, and then deliver them to various units across the country.
Right. You said it was like when a new car gets delivered, right? Somebody has to move it, somebody has to test it.
Exactly.
So what was that like then?
It was interesting. It was interesting in that I was bringing up my family at the same time and doing Air Force duties and a lot of traveling, and I loved it. I just loved it. I loved traveling, I loved seeing different people, and I loved the mechanical part of what I was doing in the Air Force.
Okay, so tell me about your connection then. You have a very odd connection with Vera, the Lancaster bomber that's here at the museum.
Yes. In 1952, when I was working at the Central Experimental Improving Establishment, there was a plane crash in Trenton, and it was a Lancaster. It actually broke its back, lost 2 engines, and it was practically destroyed. There were no injuries to speak of, but the Air Force decided, well, are we going to keep the aircraft or are we going to scrap it? And it was Aero, the contractor in Toronto, that would make the decision. So the decision was made, no, we're not going to scrap it, because it was only, the aircraft had been built in 1945 but hadn't flown because the war was over. So in actual fact, the aircraft only had 10 hours on it. It was brand new. So the contractor decided that, no, I think we can, with a few spare parts, put her back together and put it back into service with the Air Force. So that's in fact what they did. The parts that they needed were actually, well, the back of the main part of the aircraft, the fuselage, it was cracked, and it was like somebody breaking their back. So they had to get the center part of the fuselage together, and they did. This was after the war. There were no more Lancasters around, and they decided, well, let's look around for a Lancaster that's been scrapped. So eventually they went to, they found out a farmer in just outside of Calgary had an old Lancaster sitting in his field, and he was using it for a chicken coop. And the contractor went to the farmer and asked him if they could buy or retrieve the fuselage from this plane and to repair it. In the meantime, I was transferred from Trenton to Edmonton, where we did cold weather testing on planes from NATO. I was discharged from the Air Force after 10 years, and after 32 years on the police department, joined the Warplane Heritage as a volunteer.
And you're working on the Lancaster?
And on a Lancaster.
A Lancaster?
This is the Lancaster that we fly in Hamilton. Yes. Here. And because I had a little bit of knowledge from the Lanc that had crashed in Trenton in 1952. So after working on it for 20 years or so on our Lancaster and flying on it as flight engineer, I thought, this is similar to the Lanc that we took apart in 1952. Checked the serial number, and in fact, the Lancaster that we are flying in today only 2 in the world that are still flying, is the same Lancaster that crashed in 1952 in Trenton that I had helped to take apart and send back to the contractor.
So a lot of you is in
A lot
Vera,
of me
right?
is in that Lancaster.